All right, ready for the next project. As you can see, I've got the tank off the bike. I got it hanging from the rafters again. I'm going to do the dual brake conversion. I think I've got all the parts. I got one more part coming. It says out for delivery, so I'm going to go ahead and start on the project. If you got a center stand, it's a whole lot easier. Of course, I don't have a center stand yet. I still got to get that fixed. But either way, we got to get the front end up. We're going to drop the wheel off of it. The parts I'm going to need, if you've got a factory master cylinder, it's recommended getting the 5/8 master cylinder. I think it's got a bigger piston in it. It helps push more fluid down there and gives you enough power to actually stop dual brakes on the front of these. I'm going to use the top line that's already there. We're going to replace the Banjo, or not the Banjo, I'm sorry. We're going to replace the brake splitter here. I'm actually going to use a dual splitter. So I've got my master cylinder. I've got my top line I'm going to use that's already there. It's going to feed into my splitter. Splitter's going to go out to the right side, left side. I've got a new Banjo, new lower brake line, the soft one. I got a new hard brake line for the right side. We got caliper, we got caliper bolts, we got rotor bolts. The only thing I don't have and what I'm waiting on right now is the brake line holder, and that's basically just to keep the line from rubbing into the tire, bumping into the tire. So step one is removing the speedometer cable. I like these vice grips. They have a curved spot in the middle. They're really good for taking off these lines. That'll keep you from messing up the threads on the lines. It shouldn't be on there super tight anyhow, but just make sure you don't strip it out. And once I get this off, I'm going to drop my wheel. The wheel should fall out of there. I'm going to leave the right-hand caliper attached. So there's my speedo cable. And that's pretty good. I'm going to loosen my bolts here. This is a 13mm. I'm not going to take them all the way off. Just want to drop them to the bottom. That way when I get the other side loose, the wheel doesn't just fall off on me. I'll loosen them evenly. Then I'm going to lift up on the wheel with my hand, take the weight off of it so it doesn't just drop out of there. Take my cap off. Switch hands. And just holding the weight off so it doesn't just drop. Cap off. And then make sure you don't get your hand caught between the rotor and the caliper. And then the wheel will drop down off there. I'm just going to roll this out from under here. So with the wheel off, the first thing I need to do actually is get the axle apart. But we're going to remove this cover here, and the hub is already threaded for a rotor for this side. So we got to get the axle out of the middle of it so we can get this hub off. I want to make sure I don't get any dirt or any grease because I don't want to have to replace my wheel bearings. I think they're good. They spin fine. There's no noise coming from it. So make sure you keep your surfaces clean so you don't get any gunk, goo, sand, dirt, whatever in your axle. Now to separate this, you'll need 2 crescent wrenches. You'll need one for this side, one for that side, or a couple wrenches that fit the axle. I'm just going to use crescent wrenches to do it with. So basically, it threads in through this side. So I'm going to use my smaller wrench to hold it in place. And this should not be super tight. I'm going to use my larger wrench. We're going to loosen this up just like you would a nut or a bolt. So I'm going to go left and right. And then my axle will unscrew. So from this side, you can see on the camera the axle is actually screwing out of this side over here. So in order to try to keep it from falling apart, I'm going to lay it on the table. I'm going to put pressure on this side to keep it from falling apart, and that way I don't have to worry about my bearings popping out of it. So I'm up on my work surface. I'm just going to unscrew this. Once you get to a certain point, the axle will pull up out of here. And again, make sure you've got a nice clean spot to put that because you don't want to get that contaminated. So with that off, I'm going to take these 3 screws out of this for the hub cover. These are number 2 screws, not number 3s like on the engine. Get this piece off. As you can see, it looks just like the other side, except for you don't have to see the bearing assembly. Alright, so after we get the dust boot off, we're going to take our axle, drop it back in. If you got this gooed up, contaminated in any way, shape, or form, put a little bit of axle grease back on there before you drop it back in. I kept mine clean. It's only been out for a few seconds, so if you've got to leave it off for a few days to do something, make sure you clean that up properly before you put it back in. So I'm going to hand tighten it. I'm going to flip it back over. We're going to tighten up the axle. Again, you don't want to crank it. You saw how loose it was. Well, it wasn't loose, but it wasn't tight either. You just want to snug it up when you put it back together. Again, just snug. Back up on my workbench. Alright, set for our axle tight. Our new rotor. Line my rotor up with the holes that are in there. Now we're waiting on the mail. So we're waiting on the mail to get here. I'm gonna go ahead and bleed off my brake system. I'm not sure what fluid he had in here. He told me he ran a .5 in here. .5 is not supposed to be in these old bikes. Should be a .3, .4 maybe. I'm gonna put .4 back in it. But you cannot mix .5 and .3 or .4. So I've got to get all the old brake fluid out of the system. So I'm going to try to gravity bleed it. So I've turned my wheel all the way to the left. So basically it's running downhill the best I can. I'm going to take the top off. I've got like a baby nose suction bulb. And I'm going to draw the fluid out of here that I can. I'm going to break the bleeder loose at the bottom. I'm just going to keep filling the top up with .3 or .4 and keep pushing the fluid down the line. Try to get all the fluid out of there that I can. One more thing to make a note of is since we are working with brake fluid, my fender's right there. I'm going to go get a towel and cover my fender up too, just in case I have dripped something on there. I don't want to wipe the paint off of my fender there. So I took my cap off. I'm going to pull that out. Brake fluid is full. Just got an empty water bottle here. Again, baby nose sucker. I'm just going to draw all this fluid out of here that I can. Then I'm going to fill it back up with .3. Actually, I'm going to use .4. And then I'm going to open the bleeder up and just let the fluid run down through it, basically. So again, go with a .4. Real careful not to dump it down my paint. Hand underneath it, rag underneath it if you have to. And I just poked a small hole in it too, so I'm not going to just pour it super fast. I'm going to put more in here than actually belongs in here, because again we're going to bleed it all the way through. I'm going to drain the cylinder probably at least once, maybe twice, and this is the original master cylinder. I have not changed it yet. So I've got it pretty much full. And again, we're going to go down, we're going to open the brake bleeder and let it run out. So just got to keep the tubing there. I'm going to break the bleeder loose, trying to keep the bottle from tipping over until it gets started. And what we definitely don't want to do is we don't want the cylinder to run loose or run empty up top. So you got to keep an eye on your master and make sure it doesn't run empty on you. These are if your bike's not hanging from the rafters. I don't want to pull that all the way out, I just want to break it loose. And the second one should get some flow going through it. As you can see, I've got fluid dripping into there now. Again, whatever you do, don't make sure your master cylinder doesn't run dry, because you don't want to run this completely empty. I want to keep fluid in it all the time, so basically I'm just going to keep it on the top. Again, once that gets near the bottom, I'm just going to keep filling it up 2 or 3 times until I feel like all the old fluid's out of it. I'm looking at my fluid at the top as it's running down. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's definitely some separation going on, so that was probably definitely .5 that was in there to start with. And that's why I didn't want to change my master cylinder first, because I don't want to get my new master cylinder full of .4 and .5. So again, I'm just going to keep running this through. That's the second time I filled it up. I'm probably going to do it 4 times, 5 times maybe. That way there's no separation in your brake fluid, because that may cause you some bad brakes, which would not be a good thing. So that's about the 4th time through. As you can see, I've got a nice clear fluid coming out of it now, so I know I've got new brake fluid in there. So this time I'm just going to let it run all the way out until it just stops running altogether. Because again, we're going to have to bleed them again once we put the new the dual banjo and stuff like that on it anyhow. So I think I've got my master cylinder, I got my line pretty much cleaned out. And by the time we bleed it out the 2nd or 3rd time, should be nice good brake fluid in there. Alright, so I'm down to a drip now, so I'm going to go ahead and close my bleeder. I'm not going to tighten it all the way because we're going to break this loose and bleed them off again, but I don't want to forget it, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up by hand. That way when I add the new fluid to it, it doesn't run all over the place. And I'm going to pressure bleed these when I get done. I'll actually put pressure on the brakes and push them out, because as you can see, definitely 2 different types of fluid in there. The synthetic is floating on top of the dot, and I need to make sure when I drain this, when I'm bleeding them out, I'm going to use a clear bottle again and make sure I still don't have any separation, because I'm going to have to keep bleeding that out until the separation's all gone. Again, you don't want those 2 fluids together. It's like getting air in your line. When you pull the brakes, it's just you're gonna lose some pressure, because those 2 are not going to push like they should. So I'm back up top, so I'm gonna go ahead and clean this master cylinder out and get ready to take off. Basically, just want to wipe the inside of it out so I don't get brake fluid everywhere while I'm working on other things, or drip it again back on my frame or my fender or anything like that. Alright, so my master cylinder is cleaned out. I wiped it out really good. I wiped off the boot and I put the lid back on it so it wouldn't get any dirt in it. So I'm going to take off the master cylinder now. And I'm going to take these pieces off one at a time as I work my way down. So from here, loosen the stem on it. Just get that loose. The mirror just threads out. Like so. Next thing I want to take off is my brake line. Now, since we drained all the fluid out of it, we shouldn't lose anything, but I've still got paper towel or something ready just in case we lose a little bit. There still may be a little bit in this back end of the neck. So I just want to be ready so I don't drop it on the ground. That's one right first time. I'll also make sure I don't damage my banjo or lose my washers when I take this off, because I want to reuse these banjos, or this brake line in the banjo. I'm going to check my washers when I get it all loose to make sure they're not damaged, and probably reuse the washers also. If it's a little stiff, if you wiggle it just a little bit, it'll come out a little bit easier. And washer on the ground. Again, as you can see, I didn't really lose any fluid. A couple little drops here and there though. So the next step, there's 2 8mm bolts through the front of the master cylinder. Take them off evenly. If you wanted to, you could mark your handle so you can put it on the exact same spot. I'll probably reposition mine anyhow, so that's all there is to getting the master off. I'm going to go ahead and put my bolts back in so I don't lose them. I'm not going to tighten them because it's not going on anything, but at least they're in there. I'm going to take the plug out of my new master cylinder, put it in the old master cylinder so we don't get any dirt or anything up inside of this one. So that's my plug out of my new one, and again, just popping it in the hole so it doesn't get dirt up inside of it. One more thing to note, if you look on the bottom of your master cylinder, this one says 14, so that's a 14 millimeter. The new one actually says 5/8 on it. That way you know you've got the right master cylinder for what you're trying to do. Single brake, the 14's plenty. Again, dual brakes, you want the 5/8. I'll take my bolts out of here. And step around the other side and get them started. I'm just kind of guesstimating where my other one was. I got a pretty good idea. Sometimes if the bars are older, you'll actually see lines on the bars. Again, I'll fit mine. Once I sit on it, I'll actually adjust it and put it where it's comfortable with my hand. The other one was pretty close, but it needed adjusted anyhow, so just gonna start my bolts. Try not to drop it down in the engine if you do drop it. Just gonna snug it up by hand. And even though I took that off with an impact, I'm not going to tighten it with an impact. You want to tighten them up by hand. Watch when you're getting against your throttle. You don't want to get it too close. You want the lever to clear, so make sure you leave it a little distance there. Don't butt it all the way up against your throttle. And again, you want to tighten these evenly. You don't just tighten the top bolt and the bottom bolt later. As soon as it starts to grab, then go to the other side and tighten it. And just eyeballing it to about where it was in the first place. I know my master cylinder was almost straight up and down because I wasn't leaking any fluid. Like I said, and even that tight is just too tight to even rotate it. So again, you don't need to over tighten that. So snug, snug, and that's not going anywhere. There's my new master. Putting on the compression washers, putting it on the same way it came off. Put the Banjo in. I want to make sure I wipe all this brake fluid off of here too, because I don't want to ruin the paint on it. And I'm not going to tighten this up yet. I'm just going to get it in hand tight. Once I get it hand tight, I'm going to make sure my line's going straight down. I don't want it to come off like to the front or the back. I want it to pretty much go straight down. And then this doesn't get super tight either. When you go to tighten it though, your line's going to want to try to creep up like mine just did. So you got to make sure you hold the line with one hand and then tighten the screw or the nut with the other. Bolt, banjo, whatever you want to call it. And then your boot will slide back over. But again, I'm going to clean this off before I do that. Got some brake part cleaner. Again, be careful where you're spraying this if you're going to spray it directly like I'm going to try. Just going to go really lightly. I just want enough to get the brake fluid off of the top of the surface. If in doubt, spray it on your rag. And then use your rag to wipe your surfaces down with. Get that off of all the paint, all the surfaces, make sure it's not on my bars or anywhere. And again, I didn't drip much because we drained it to start with. Put my boot back on. Next thing I want to do is I want to get my splitter out of here. And for some reason I call that a dual banjo all the time. Don't ask me why. But if you hear me say dual banjo, don't call me out on it too bad because I know I'm doing it. I just can't stop myself for some reason. So we'll break my lines loose, and again, we shouldn't lose much fluid here, but we may lose a little. So you want to make sure you got a rag ready once you get them loose. So I'm just going to break it loose. Break that one loose. And then grab me a towel so I can sop up anything that drips down. Again, very important when you're doing this. Brake fluid, paint, not good. The other thing we got to do is we got to take off our brake light switch, which is on the side over here. That just turns red, so I'm going to unhook the lines to it. Turn my bars the other way so I can get to these easier. Don't want to snap them off, so just kind of push this over. don't know that it matters. I don't think it does. It's just a switch, so basically it's either on or off. All right, after I get done hooked, I was going to take that off up underneath there, but I think I'm going to take it off after I get it out. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my brake lines off. Again, making sure I'm catching brake fluid because I am getting a couple drips here and there. Make sure your paint is protected as well. My Banjo. And the washer, I'm going to put it on the same way I took it off. Leave a second rag underneath there too, just to soak up anything extra. Set my Banjo down. Take off the top Banjo. And just a little bit of fluid from each one of these, but not a lot. Try not to drop my washer. So my lines are loose, my switch is unplugged. Two 10mm bolts in the middle here. Take those out. And my splitter is off. Move that right there. Pull my bolts out, and we'll go over to the table and take our switch off the side of it. This should just spread out of here fairly easily. Not sure who put it in there, but I had to actually put a little bit of pressure on there to get it to come loose. I'm going to put a little Teflon tape around it. I don't think you need to, but I'm going to put a little Teflon tape on it just in case. Plus I don't have to crank it down as tight as they did, because I don't know if it just seized up in the aluminum, but I definitely had to put a lot of torque on that thing to break it loose. Here's my new splitter. Again, a little bit of Teflon tape. Probably don't need it, but I'm doing it anyhow. Can't hurt it. I'll tighten my switch back in here, and again, I don't know why it was that tight in the first place. I'm gonna tighten it, but not like they had it. I can tighten a couple more turns past that. You can always snug it up later. It's too hard to break it off and then try to fix it. So I got that in place. I'm gonna go ahead and put it up in here. So I'm bolting my splitter on here, and the bolt that's on the short side is not long enough, so hopefully you got some spare bolts or screws laying around that'll fit. I've got a casing bolt here that's the same size, same thread pitch, so I'm just going to put that in there temporarily until I get a chance to run to the store and get a longer bolt. But that'll hold me in place until then. Probably hold me in place forever, but just to be right, I'll change it out. All right, now that I got the top one started, I'm going to go ahead and put it back on again. And there's enough room there, but it's kind of tight, so it's probably easier just to do that. And again, this is just to hold the brake line going that direction, but since we've only got one anyhow, unless you get one with a Z, I'm just going to tighten it up and make sure it doesn't hit anything. Got my splitter on, I got my top line started. I'm going to go ahead and start my bottom line here. Let's see, make sure my washer's in there correctly. I'll probably get online and see if I can find one of these for Z1. It probably has both lines, so it basically will keep both lines from turning, but for right now, I'm going to put it on like this and just tighten it down again to make sure it doesn't leak. little more snug in there now. Again, you don't want to super crush those, but you want to crush them tight enough or smash them tight enough to crush the washers in there. So we're kind of back to where we were to start with. We've got one side hooked up and ready to hook up the other side now. So one of the parts I was waiting on just got here. JustBikes.com. Got a lot of parts from him. Always ships super fast. Prices are really reasonable. This is going to be the standoff to keep the brake line from getting into the wheel. So I've got my new upper and lower brake line here. I'm going to go ahead and thread my upper onto my lower real quick so I can fit it in place. I'm not going to tighten it. You should not have to thread lock these because these are flared on the end. So when it goes up in there, it should seat in there and keep it from leaking. So no thread lock needed there. Again, I'm not tightening it. I'm just putting it on there because I'm going to fit it in place, and then we'll tighten it up after I get it fitted. So it comes inside around like so, and then up and in like that. So we're kind of fitted in place. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up my Banjo at the top. And make sure my shock, when I turn the wheels, I don't hit my secondary shock. So I'm clear of that. So I'm going to go ahead and snug this down. It's in the groove in the back. And again. Again, you don't want to crank those, you just want to tighten them enough to where the washers crush in there and your line doesn't vibrate off. So I'm going to loosen my two inner fender bolts here. Try to go this way. Probably not going to be able to get the camera up in there. But basically, I'm going to take out one and just loosen the other and then slide the new hose bracket in place. So after a little fight to backtrack a little bit here, I basically, without scratching my fender up, I couldn't really get that lined up properly. So I popped this back off, popped the line through it first, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it back in place. And it doesn't always work out perfect, unfortunately. So now I can tighten my bolts up. And again, I probably could have fought with that for a little bit and got it in place, but it just wasn't worth the hassle. Sometimes you spend longer trying to make something work than just taking it apart and fixing it right in the first place. Okay. Now my bottom line, again, wraps back around the front here. Like so. Line up in there. Let's thread that on. Again, I'm not going to tighten it up all the way because I might have to adjust a little bit. I think he custom bends these lines, so I might have to move it a little bit once I get it in place. So I'm ready to put the new rotor on. I've got my bolts ready. On the back of this wheel, I don't know if I can get the camera angle just right. Probably can this way. You'll see there's a bunch of little like yellow stoppers in there. Those are just plastic inserts to keep dirt out of the inside of the wheel. When you take your new bolt and start it, it'll actually just push that piece of plastic right out the back side of it. Just like that. So I'm just going to do that to all 6 of them real quick. And if you have to pick those bolts up, those are an 8M 1 pitch. So it's a 8M1, not a 1.25. Again, just running them down till they stop. Torque wrench, again 25 foot-pounds. And you want to go back and forth on these like you were tightening a tire. So I'm going to get them close. And just going to crisscross on your tightening. I'll set these on the floor so I can torque them. And again, if you're new to a torque wrench, when it clicks, it's done. That doesn't mean keep on turning. So as soon as it clicks, you stop. Again, look at your locking tabs. If they're all lined up, you're good. Fold them over. If not, like this one needs to adjust a little bit. I'll pull it tighter a little bit more. Just enough I can get the locking tab up above it. Same on this one. A couple of these are pretty close to the wheel, so I'm just going to take a flathead and get them started. Try not to tear up your paint. Like that. Could edit that out, but where would the fun be? Again, I'm just going to get this started with that. Back to my extension to tap them on in. So again, our brake line's not tight yet. If I put that other caliper on first, I'm probably not going to get my wheel back in, so I'm going to leave this off. You can see it's a close fit anyhow. The other caliper is definitely not going to go in there. I'm going to go ahead and line up my wheel. I'm going to lift my wheel up in place and we'll drop the caliper on. Me, it's easier to sit down. I'm going to lift the wheel up and I'm going to use my legs and my feet to hold it in place while I put the bolts on it, the nuts on it, so I can line it up straight. So basically I'm just using my foot to hold it in place. It doesn't have to be all the way up on there, it just has to be close enough to get the nuts started. I don't have the washer on there yet, I've just got one nut. Spin it up a little bit. Let's start the other side. Lets me take a little pressure off my leg at least. Get my nut washer. Put my washer on. Other side. I've got my washer. I'm going to get my foot out from under it. Alright, so we're ready to torque the wheel on. I'm just going to run these up. I'm going to run them up evenly on both sides. So I'm going to run it up a little bit on this side so you'll see it moving. Up it there. Again, same on the other side. The cap should be rising evenly. You shouldn't see a gap on the front or the back side of either one. If you do, you need to make sure you're tightening them up so the cap comes up evenly. You don't want to cross your cap. And then run it so your cap's even on both sides. The torque wrench, we got about 16 foot-pounds on these. I can't find a torque setting on these. I'm going by the torque chart online. Basically, it's an 8mm bolt, 8mm bolt with a 125 thread. It says anything basically 16 foot-pounds for that. So we're going to go with that. I know it doesn't have to be super tight. As soon as you click, you stop turning. So click and stop. Both sides evenly. I'm going to go ahead and clean this rotor since I had it off and been touching it. I don't want to make sure I've got any solvents on it, any paint, anything weird that should be on there. Hand, grease, sand, dirt, whatever. Just want to make sure there's no imperfections on there. So I've got it all cleaned up. Let's bolt the caliper on next. So there's my caliper. This is the right hand caliper. I'm guessing this is aftermarket. I'm 99.9% sure. I think I saw these on like Alibaba.com for 35, 40 bucks a piece. You probably got to bring in 100 of them to do that. So I think I paid 95 bucks from Z1 Enterprise for these. So we'll see if it works good. I'll slide this over top of my caliper or my rotor. I may have to push it in a little bit to get it to fit, but it should be pretty close. I hit the camera here, sorry. I'm going to have to push it in just a little bit. It's out just a hair. Alright, let's start caliper on. Pushed in the piston a little bit on it. It should slide right over top. And it does. Mine's going in a different direction. All right, as you can tell by my utter silence there for a second, basically the Z1 caliper, I never paid any attention till just now. I don't know enough about it, obviously. Feeds in from the top, whereas the H2 caliper feeds in from the back. So I took just this pretty line that he made me and basically just bent it all to pieces so I could get it to work. So that's it, besides filling up my brake lines, again bleeding them out, getting the brake fluid in the lines, getting the air out of the brakes. All right, so after I rerouted my brake line, again, I'm going to try to bend that up a little bit better. I did go back on Google and did a little research. Looks like some other people are putting these on there also. Again, I've never used the Z1 caliper. I always used the H2 caliper, flipped the bracket and put it on there and then bent the line under and back and around. But either way, that looks like how it should kind of be, but if it works properly, I'll take this line and just fold it up under and make it look a little bit neater. Well, one last thing, don't forget to connect your brake light switch, which I almost did. And again, that's going to fit a little bit tighter because that splitter is bigger than the other one, but again, don't think the wiring matters. Again, it's just a switch, so basically pressure pushes the switch, closes the contact, and turns the light on. All right, so I'm ready to fill the system back up. So I'm going to fill it up with .4, and then at the end I'll pump bleed them. With the lid still off the master cylinder, what you want to do is you want to pull the brake and see how I'm getting those bubbles. So basically I've got hardly any brake handle at all. So my brake handle's all the way back in. You don't want to do that rapidly, do it slowly and let go slowly. And you can actually see the piston going back and forth in there. Basically, the hole in the back is the intake, and the hole in the front side, the way I've got the camera here, is where the air is going to come back through. So that's sucking in the fluid here and it's pushing it down the line. Air is going to be lighter, so the air is going to kind of find its way up the brake line, or it's going to get trapped somewhere down in the bottom. So by having no handle at all, as you can see when I push, the air that's coming back up the line is actually coming back out through that hole now. So again, slowly, not rapidly. It's not like a car where you just pump it 500 times and then crack the line open. We're going to do this slow until basically we've got no bubbles coming out of there. And then one last time we'll bleed the brake lines. So I'm starting to get a nice good grip on here. I've got a pretty firm handle, but it's still not the way it should be. Again, another bubble out of it. So I'm still getting air out of here. So I'm just going to keep doing this until basically I'm not seeing any air bubbles. Now I've got a brake handle now, so technically you could bleed them out of the bottom, but personally it's easier to get all this out of this top line for me and then bleed the bottom, because most likely what will happen is everything from the new splitter down there is going to settle overnight and it's going to come up this way. So if you let it set for a night or a day, put your lid on, of course, so you don't get stuff in your master cylinder, but sometimes you got extra line out of there. But no matter what, you're going to probably have to bleed the bottom out. I would never put it back together without bleeding the bottoms. And again, just keep doing this until basically like that is fluid. So you can tell that's fluid pushing up through there, not air bubbles. So I'm going to squeeze it one more time. Again, let go. Squeeze it again. And I'm just getting fluid pushing through now. So I've got all the line, or sorry, I've got all the fluid into the master cylinder I'm going to get in there. So you can either gravity bleed the brakes again, or you can actually pressure bleed them. In this case, since I've done a new master cylinder, I've got a new splitter, a new caliper. There's a lot of places to get air bubbles in them, so I'm actually going to pressure bleed it. And by doing that, it's going to be hard for me to hold the camera, stay out of the way. But I'm going to give it a shot. But basically, we're going to pump the brake just like you would a car. Hold the brake lever, crack a bleeder open, and then, so we're going to crack the bleeder open fast, tighten the bleeder fast. Whatever you do when you squeeze this, don't let the handle go before you tighten the bleeder back up, because if you do, you're going to suck air right back through there and back up into your lines, and you're going to be starting all over again. One other thing is you don't need the cap on to bleed these out. So basically I'm going to fill my cylinder back up again. I'm leaving the cap off. Just make sure you don't fill it all the way to the top this time, because when you squeeze that, as you can see, that little bubble pushes up through there with the air, or with the fluid in it. If you get air or something in there, you don't want it bubbling up and running all over the place. So I don't have a lot of hose around here. It's just not something I keep a lot of. Used to when I worked on cars a lot. Motorcycles don't need a lot of different size of hoses. So basically I found a hose that would fit on the top of the bleeder on this side. The Z1 bleeder's got a different size nipple on the top of it. So I've got a hose on my right side, hose on my left side, depending on which way you're looking. Right side, left side. And basically we're going to bleed it off into the container because you don't want to bleed your brake fluid out in your grass or on your driveway or on your floor. You're probably going to spill some or drip some like me, but either way you don't want to intentionally do it. So again, I'm going to pull the handle up top. I'm going to bleed it into here. I'm going to make sure I got good clear fluid. I'm going to make sure there's no bubbles or no air spurting out when I do it. Okay, to do this by myself, I'm going to create a basically a brake bleed system. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bottle of fluid and probably about half the bottle of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in my tube here. I'll make sure my tube is down in the fluid. So it'll be down in the fluid like that. When I squeeze the pedal or handle, I'll break the bleeder open. The air bubble should bubble into here. And if I let go by accident, instead of sucking up air, it'll suck the fluid back out of the bottom. So it still takes a little bit longer to bleed that way. And I'm going to try not to let go of the handle, but since I'm doing it by myself, this will help bleed it off faster if you have a problem reaching the handle. Luckily for me, this side's going to be easy. The other side might be a little more difficult. So basically, you want your tube under the fluid, squeeze your handle, break your bleeder loose, tighten the bleeder, let go of the handle. That's the order it should go in. Okay, so there's my setup. Fluid is up to about here. My hose is underneath of the fluid. I've checked my clearance, so when I turn this, I can actually move the bottle back and forth without it falling off, so I don't drop the wrench. Back that up just a little bit. Again, hopefully you got the right size hose and stuff. I'm making do with what I've got. So that gives me enough room to move that back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze the brake lever and hold it. Don't pump it. I'm going to turn this open. My brake lever drops. I'm closing the valve before I let go of the brake lever. You don't need to super tighten it because we're going to reopen it again. I'm going to let it up. If you did have this above the fluid, if you didn't have the valve closed all the way, it would suck air. If I didn't get the valve closed all the way that way, at least it's sucking fluid back up the line, even though it's going to push the air back down the line again, but you're still not going to suck a big glob of air in there. And eventually we'll get it cleaned out, so I'm going to do this probably through another master cylinder full of fluid. Then I'll do the other side. So squeeze, I've got a really firm handle, break it loose. As soon as the handle starts dropping, you can stop turning your valve and then tighten it back up. I go to the handle, squeeze, open, tighten, and repeat. Check my master cylinder, still got fluid in it. It's down to about where it normally would be. We'll do this side one more time. I'm getting a really good firm handle up here, so hold it, open it. I'm not seeing any bubbles in my fluid either. If you watch your fluid, that will also tell you. Kind of like we got bubbles up top. When you're doing this, if you're seeing your fluid, which I know I've got a yellow bottle, sorry, I don't have another clear bottle that doesn't have water or something in it. Basically, I'm watching the fluid and I'm watching for bubbles. If I keep doing this and I've got 0 bubbles, then basically I've got all the air out of this side. And right now I'm just getting clear fluid out of here. So that side's done. So we'll tighten that up, put my hose off, and then clean up a little bit of brake fluid that I spill all over the place. So clean up, basically a little brake parts cleaner. Don't like using this inside, but make sure you're well ventilated if you're going to use it. Make sure you get your rotor. You don't want to rotate that and turn on the brake or hit the brakes with any type of fluid or anything on it the first time. You don't end up marring up your new rotor or your brake shoes. Of course, the bike's going to need a full clean when I'm done with it anyhow, but At least I'll get the big stuff off of it. And make sure you get everything away from your bleeder screw. Clean it up real well. Once you get it cleaned up, check the tightness of it. Because the last thing you need is that thing to pop open while you're hitting the brakes. That should be tight, but don't break it off in there. Okay, same thing for this side. Again, I've got my line fed down into my fluid. I'm down below the fluid line, so if I let go, it doesn't suck air back into it. I've got fluid in my master cylinder. So I'm going to squeeze the brake lever. As soon as I get pressure, I'm going to open the bleeder. As soon as my handle goes almost all the way down, tighten the bleeder. Let my brake lever up. Again, put pressure. You don't have to pump it. It's not like a car where you're building up a booster. I'm going to pull the handle. Pull it out. Closed. And again, if you open that bleeder all the way, your handle will drop super fast. And then you got to kind of struggle to get it back closed before you let go of the handle. So I'm putting pressure on the handle, open the bleeder slowly. As soon as I feel the handle start to go, before I get to the bottom, I'm tightening the bleeder up. And again, I'm just watching in my fluid here for bubbles. I'm going to bleed through probably a full master cylinder just to make sure, because right now I'm getting a lot of bubbles out of there. And if I had a clear bottle, I would have used it, but again, I've used my clear bottles for my whole fluids. Until I get all the bubbles out of here. I'm going to keep bleeding, and again, I'm definitely bubbling up still. Usually it's just one or two sections where you've got air in your line. Again, a lot of it gets trapped in here. Some of it's trapped in this new line. Again, the new caliper had a lot of air in it. The old caliper shouldn't have a lot of air into it until I push the air from the splitter into it. Looks like the sun's coming out. So now I'm back to just fluid again. And you can't really see it from here, but there's a little bit of dark fluid in there also, so I'm still pushing out a little bit of the old stuff, but it's just a little bit. Checking my master cylinder again. Do not run your master cylinder dry. You'll be starting this all over again. Got about one more pump with this. Nothing but clear fluid in there. I'm going to tighten that up the rest of the way. I'm going to fill my master up, put the lid back on it, and we'll take it down the road and see if it actually stops. And then the last thing, same as the other side. Just going to turn my wheel around here. I got my lid back on my brakes and my master. Make sure your nipple's tight, don't break it. Clean it up. I'm going to take a little brake cleaner. I'm going to spray my rotor down good. Don't want anything bad on there. No dirt, no oil. Don't want to cause any glazing problems. I can see some white marks where I had it on there before. So just clean your system down really good before you start rotating your wheels. Again, we live near the beach, so I got sand all over the place. I'll be driving down the boulevard probably, hopefully by the end of the week or next week. So I tend to get sand stuck up in my rotors and stuff. End up gouging them up anyhow, but at least for now it's going to look good. So that's the end result. Master cylinder, brake splitter, new line coming down, Z1 caliper, Z1 right hand brake line, new rotor, bolts, and went up with dual brakes. Took it out today, made a couple slow stops, came back, cleaned it back up again, rechecked all my fittings, took it out, cranked it up, and didn't have any problem stopping. Stops on a dime. Again, make sure you torque all your bolts, make sure your brake lines aren't leaking. Make sure if you take the brake banjos off, replace your washers. If you don't replace the washers, at least make sure you put them back on the same direction. Try to keep them on the same side of the fittings. That way if there's any grooves in them, they'll set right back in there. And just be careful, double check all your work.